This is pretty high tech here, so I hope you'll bear with me. We're making a movie, showing movies, and all kinds of things. So I hope we can do all that at the same time. It's interesting to consider melodrama in the Ice Storm and Pleasantville because they seemingly are very different films. But melodrama is a form which has been popular in theater since the 19th century at least, and in cinema is popular in films all over the world. We don't usually use the term melodrama, we usually use the term drama. So if you go in the video store, you'll see a section of DVDs called drama. But it really is a genre that has a form and has a certain kind of thematic unity or concern. What makes melodrama a perennial favorite as a genre is that it deals with moral issues, but it brings them down to the level of everyday life. And sometimes the moral issues could be treated on a grand scale with the presentation of good and evil, but more often it's about emotional situations. Now, it's a little unfashionable to say I really enjoyed a film and it was about good and evil. I mean, it might not be something you could get people to watch, but we do talk about films as being about justice between people or mistreatment of people, or we talk about psychological good health. In the history of melodrama, they talked about it as dealing with right feeling. A major authority on melodrama, Peter Brooks, said that one of the things that melodrama does is it creates drama inside the audience that builds on what's already there. And we already have a drama or a conflict in our life between official authority and the codes by which we run our everyday lives. And we actually all have these codes. It's very interesting if people will talk to each other about it, but usually you don't talk to other people about it. But you really do have them. I mean, in my case, there are things I learned from my mother, or things I learned from my father, or things I discovered on my own, but I really stick to them, and I really believe they're true. Personal codes, perhaps private, are what we use to live by, but they're also what we use to interpret melodramatic characters and situations. Now, these two films have a wonderful contrast. In the Ice Storm, there are many sexual encounters, but they're frustrating and unsatisfying, both for us as viewers and for the characters. The theme of the film is about the moral limits of the upper middle class, the unsatisfying personal and family lives that rich people led in the 1970s. Now, we like to look at movies that show us the rich and how their lives are in shambles. I think the current one is Celebrity Drug Rehab, you know. You'd love to see that, and it's a favorite theme since the 19th century. In contrast, two teens from contemporary times are thrust into a 50s television show, Pleasantville, which has a colorless world. Well, it's actually in black and white, but it's also a static world without change. So what happens in the course of Pleasantville is that the teenagers and then the young man's mother, played by Joan Allen, have sexual awakenings and experiences that indicate they're coming to knowledge that some of the people of Pleasantville enter the stream of life and find a path to identity and human warmth. So that is indicated by a fascinating shift to color. Now I'd like to step back and look at the structures of melodrama, because there are actual structures that you can look for in melodramatic films. First of all, as I mentioned, It questions authority, but it does so with a heavily emotional structure. Sometimes there are real emotional excesses, and these give vent to tensions that the characters don't usually discuss, and that we also might not discuss. The narrative pace itself is episodic since it focuses on these distinct, emotionally expressive moments. And so there's not much emphasis on cause and effect, but instead a reliance on coincidence. For example, two teens just happen to enter the past in Pleasantville, or the parents just happen to frequently discover their kids in moments of sex play in the ice storm. Furthermore, in melodrama, scripted emotional moments are accompanied by tremendous use of spectacle, both visual and audio spectacle. So in plays in the 19th century, you might have sets of houses on fire or ships sinking, and this dramatic stagecraft would enhance the audience's experience of heightened emotion. In film, we use mise-en-scène and music to heighten the emotion. And both these two particular films are famous for their mise-en-scène in the innovative way they used it to create both emotional impact and a moral message. The Ice Storm of the first film is a recapitulation of an historical 1973 New England ice storm. Ang Lee tells us that, and his scene designers tell us that some of this ice was created through the use of lots of hair gel, since they didn't always have cold weather. But it certainly is a spectacular ice storm. And here it represents an ice storm of the heart. Pleasantville has an ironic title. It was originally a black and white and somehow lifeless world, a world that needs knowledge, sex, emotion, identity, and embracing change. So the film, to recognize that, uses a gradual transition to color. In both films, the visual spectacle is tied to emotional and moral commentary. Now, when we think of the scenes of melodrama and how they get worked out, melodrama usually has a moral world with villains and victims, catastrophes and confrontations. In its narrative structure, it has discrete, emotionally intense situations, not necessarily directly tied to each other. So that creates an episodic structure. Because spectacle is crucial, in film, visual framing often creates a single memorable moment to sum up the scene. So that could be an image which stays in your mind like a tableau. These visuals sum up the moral theme, they have symbolic meaning, and they add an emotionally emphatic resonance. Now, the first clip I'm going to show is a party at the upper middle class family's home of the Carvers. It's mid-century modernist architecture, and it's seen during an ice storm. The sexual harshness is reflected both in the ice storm of the heart, but also in the harshness of the architecture, the hard surfaces, the reflections, the windows which are both barriers and like a fishbowl. This particular scene, the people talk about a key party. That is where the men throw their house keys in a bowl and the women pick them out and the couples go home with different people.